Hey YouTube, this is the 11th episode in the Ukrainian mercenary series that's being done in conjunction with the other podcast on this channel, the website, social media, books, and lots more in order to raise and increase awareness for Miss Ashley Oosthuizen, the young South African woman who is still currently serving a life prison sentence inside of a Thai prison that she was given at only the age of 21. So if you have not already liked and subscribed, then please do that now, because she's the only reason that I was there fighting in Ukraine, and thus the only reason that I'm able to make these videos, and in fact making these videos now. So then this is going to be the second part of the big assault. The plan for this assault, you may recall from the last episode, was basically that we were going to go out and clear the personnel path that we had discovered on previous missions of anti-tank mines up to an assault point that was near the start of some Russian hedgerows that were leading into an enemy-held village called Doroshanka. Once we were in this position, then Vitaly, our Ukrainian squad leader, would then call in an artillery bombardment. That bombardment would last for 15 minutes, after which time there would be two mortar teams. Those two mortar teams would begin lobbing in shells at 50-meter intervals, walking in our squad as it did the hedgerow clearing operation in an inverted V, with myself at the front left part of that V. During this assault, there would be an armored BMT with a 30mm mounted cannon that would come out after we had started that personnel assault and basically ride on the right flank, blasting in echelon into that hedgerow with that automatic cannon fire. We were going to move to the end of that hedgerow and then immediately do a weapons and ammo check, evacuate any casualty or wounded inside of the armored vehicle, and then fast track it back to the extraction point, which you'll see on the map. And so that night at the silo, when it came down to get to business, I suited up. That picture, which has been shown multiple times before, that was taken on this night. It was taken by Gary, and Gary did not make it back. When it was time to go, after we did our last sort of group check inside of the silo, the men and I walked to that old iron corrugated door and left the portal out into the relatively light nighttime surroundings. There was a lot of ambient night. There was a full moon and the sky was clear. Almost immediately, the vehicles had arrived. Now, I need to stop and remind the viewers that on the previous night, I actually did miss part of the review of the battle formation, the tactical plan, and that was that the previous night, JT with Vitaly George had gone out with the Sparta team, who had come from the orphanage with us, and they had established two observation posts. That way they could have eyes on to the planned assault target for a full 24 hours before we were going to go in. And so the previous day, or night I should say, those observation posts had already been established. It was now the second night when it was time for us to go out and conduct our operation, which was the mine clearing and then the hedgerow assault. And so very quickly the vehicles arrived with the blued out headlights, very low light. Everything else we had on was turned off. Before that time, it was only the red headlamps, because inside of the silo, after the sun went down, it was pitch darkness. There was no electricity, there was no light whatsoever. Myself, JT, my squad leader, who I was thrilled to have leading this operation, as opposed to Jay, who you should remember was taken out in a mutiny a couple episodes prior after proving himself unfit for command. So while myself, JT, Kenny, Vitaly, and Doc was a Ukrainian medic who was also a driver and liaison for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion members, and so he was the driver. And us five in the lead vehicle, maybe there were people in the back, I'm not sure, but we were the lead vehicle. I remember this because this time we had planned to take in a new route of infiltration. I won't be able to trace it any better than the last one because I had no idea where we were, but I was extremely concerned because of how fast we were going in through these, again, random places, and this was the first time we, as in our squad, had gone this route, although presumably, hopefully, Doc and the Ukrainians had gone multiple times before. And so I remember distinctly making conversation about how uncomfortable it was to be in the lead vehicle because I was always thinking about getting blown up by a mine. And Kenny made a joke that I wouldn't know if it happened anyway, and so that I shouldn't really worry about it, which I suppose was true, but it was not so much the blowing up part as thinking about it happening that I suppose was the actual issue. Nevertheless, it was a very uncomfortable ride that night, being the lead vehicle, just because of how bouncy around you are. Imagine being clothes in a dryer. That's sort of like what the off-road driving was like as far as physical conditions, but then also thinking that any moment you could just be blown up. And so add those together, and it's pitch dark, and you're going to do a major assault operation, and you can understand why you might be a little concerned feeling. That's not the word I was looking for. It started with a P. I also need to recall something else that started with a P because it did make a difference in the mission, or something that stood out in memory. Paracetamol. In the previous missions we had gone out on, because I used a full armor kit from the U.S. Marine Corps, and I took nothing out. I had the full level 4 plates and all of the additional Kevlar inside, whereas most of the other guys, they had those very lightweight, where you only had the chest and the back plates. Some of the guys had the plates in for the side, some didn't, and none had the groin protectors or anything. I had all of that, and again, I was carrying 13 magazines, plus the water, the food. I had an RPG-7, fully loaded, as in the picture, that picture, with my pack, my backpack on, the Kevlar, everything. Okay, that's what I went out on that night. And that's how I went out on every mission, actually. But I'll tell you why. There's multiple reasons, but I'll get into that, because this is already got enough stuff. And so, yeah, we were going out into that wilderness, and we arrived. Oh, yeah, the paracetamol, that's what I was talking about. Because those missions, oh my God, by the time we're out for so long, right? 8, 10, 12 hours, I don't know, I'd have to think about it. But my shoulders, never had I ever felt such fire burning. And I'd been in the U.S. Marine Corps. It was much worse. I never remembered anything like that. From even when we would do the 20-mile humps, it wasn't, for some reason, maybe I was much younger then, who knows? I was only 18 or 19 at the time. Here I was 34 or 33. But nevertheless, they were fired. For like 2 days afterwards, they were so sore. And so preemptively, what I did this time, knowing that this was going to be a big operation, I took a 1-gram paracetamol before we left, thinking that it would like help prevent my shoulders from burning like they had done the last time, so that I could concentrate on the mission and not on the terrible pain that was like my shoulders under the burden of all of this weight that would happen after, 5, 6, 7 hours or whatever, constantly walking, standing up, moving around, all the stuff. So, anyway, now we're back in. We make it to the drop-off point, to this extraction point, all this stuff you'll see on the map. And we got out. We got into the same formation that we had used as last time. This was just the way that it was decided, and Gary was in the very rear. He had on the radio. After Gary was Dom. I was in front of Dom. Rich was in front of me. I don't really remember who else was in front. It was a lot of people. And so, again, by this time, we were back. We had taken a different route driving in, but the rest of the time after we had been released at the extraction point was the same. So by this time, I could have taken it almost in my sleep as far as knowing where to walk and where to go. And so we did that same route and made it to the cut, that cut in between the rapeseed field and the railroad. It was at that time that we held a defensive perimeter, and JT, Vitali, George, Kenny, I think that's it. Maybe someone else. They told us to hold position where we were. They were going to go check on the Sparta OPs. Number one, to see how they were doing, although we had some radio contact with them. But number two, to make sure that they didn't shoot people that they saw moving around in the darkness, thinking that they were Russians. And so they were gone for 20 or 30 minutes, something like that, not too long. And I was holding position, I was facing forward, like crouched down. It's very dark. It wasn't so cold. Again, it was more light. I'm in like this. I'm right at the edge of a start of a thick thicket that's facing the railroads. Very good defensive position. There's people on my left and right. Dom's on my left, Rich is on my right, and then Kenny comes back, and he kneels down and he gets next to me. He's like, "Hey, mate, you and Dom and Mitch and I don't know." He said, "But you and Dom are going to come with JT, May, Nibs on the mine clearing to hold security while they clear for the mines." And so I'm like okay, whispering like, "Okay, are we doing this now?" And he's like, "Yeah," mate. And so I'm like, "Okay." And so myself, Dom, Kenny, Mitch, JT, George, and Nibs. That's who it was. We started to leave this area. Everyone else stayed in that same defensive position. Us seven, we left and proceeded to cross over the railroad tracks, okay? Now, there was Kenny, George, and Mitch were holding front security. So they were in the very front, think of like a tripod, and they were holding security for JT and Nibs, because JT was the 27-year experience and DOD explosive ordnance expert, and he had taken Nibs under his wing and been teaching him how to be able to help with the mines. And so those three were holding the front security because of how close we were to the Russian positions, so that JT and Nibs could concentrate on the mines and not on Russians, shooting them from out of the darkness. Whereas Dom and myself, we were holding rear security. And so basically we started to move up this trail where we had seen all these mines before. And on the way up, all we did, or all JT and Nibs did, was to crouch down and use talcum powder. Especially in the ambient moonlight, he would just kneel down by these anti-tank mines with the red buttons, you'll see, and he would just like splash, squirt, dab, shake this bottle of talcum powder to leave it on this mine, which would show up really well in the darkness, so that it would sort of mark them, like you would mark for a construction project or something like that. And so that's what we started to do, and we started to move down, and we made it halfway, something like that, before I saw Kenny coming back towards me, and he came to me, and when Dom was behind me, he came up to me, and he was like, "Hey, mate, Mitch isn't feeling good about things, mate." Did he say that? I said, "I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember the best I can." And I was like, "What do you mean not feeling good about things? Like is he sick?" And then he was like scared's more like. And I was like, "This fucking guy, right?" Because remember, Mitch and Hogan, these two guys who had said that they had fought with the Kurdish militia, the YPG, they had fought against ISIS, they had fought in the liberation of Raqqa, they had machine gun, done all this stuff, right? These are the same guys. And now Hogan had pulled out completely, right? Remember, he had gone to JT and said he for whatever reason, couldn't participate. He was not even supposed to be on the assault. He was going to be on top of a fucking BMR with a 30mm cannon just blasting people. It was like the easiest job of the whole gig, man. You didn't even have to walk, bro. You were like up, you know what I mean? And he wouldn't even do that. And then he wouldn't even come out on the mission. And so then Mitch said that he would come out on the mine clearing operation. And so now we're out there, right? Because again, why did we want him to come? Because he's one of the most experienced people there, apparently, from what he had said. And I mean, he seemed to know what he was talking about. There was nothing like no red flags that seemed to know that he didn't, right? It wasn't like obvious that he didn't. I felt like Rich was the least experienced here at the time, but before that I was, because it had been so long since I'd been in the military. But then by that time I'd been studying the SOPs so much, been going out on missions, and then just like really spending a lot of time getting in shape and just my head, my body, and anyway, making sure that everything was right. But Mitch wasn't feeling right. And so I was like, this fucking guy, right? Obviously, like, we're whispering. It's darkness. We're in this line on this very thin trail. We're, very close to the Russians. We're clearing, actively marking mines for clearing. And, Mitch doesn't feel right. And so Kenny was like, I want y'all to hold here, and until we get back. Just, stay here with Mitch. And I'm like, okay, like, whatever. You can't argue, okay? So here's the thing, right? I have said on this podcast multiple times where Kenny and I have almost come to blows, where outside I thought Kenny was the most ignorant type of fool, blind, obedient, slave to master, thought the earth was flat, former meth addict, just can't say enough that, left his daughters to come fight in this war. Like, what are you doing, man? But out on the field, there's no hesitation, there's no question, there's no time for that, okay? He said this is what it was. Mitch isn't feeling good. I got to stay with Mitch. Okay, well, I got to stay with Mitch. And so, boom, that's what happened. And so they continue to move off into the darkness. And Mitch I see Mitch. He comes back to me and he comes up and he's like, I'm just not feeling good about things, because he's like from Tennessee, so he's got this country accent. I'm just like, it's fine, Mitch. Okay, come on. And so to the left of this trail, there was a Russian former fighting position, like a dugout, right? And then to the right of that, there was a little footpath that led into the hedgerow. And then on the other side of that hedgerow, right, was the start of the Russian-held hedgerow that went into Doroshanka. And so I said, let's go and hold position beside that fighting pit. You don't want to get inside because smart people, when they leave their former fighting pits, if they're pulling back, they'll booby trap them so that if soldiers come and they're like, oh, I don't have to dig my own fighting pit because these guys already did it, and they hop down in it and then they get themselves killed. And so, I said, let's go beside it because then we could keep eyes on this footpath to make sure, if any Russians did come out, we would be able to have eyes. And so we went and it's the start of the hedgerow, and so on the edge you have to imagine bushes and thistles and stuff, and so we got and wedged ourselves under these bushes, completely off the trail, right? So we could not, it was really great concealment, and we were just sitting there, and I offered Mitch some candy, right, because I would always bring food out. And so I'm offering Mitch some candy, I'm just sitting there with my rifle and everything, and I know it's so serious, and I know that the night before in my sleeping bag that I was crying, and that I was fearful that I was going to be crippled and fail Ashley and all this stuff. But when I'm out there, it's something like living on the razor's edge, that visceral, it's just, there's nothing like it. And I was just, I'm not going to say I was enjoying myself, but I wasn't not enjoying myself either. And so, I'm just sitting there with my rifle in the darkness, here in Ukraine, close to some Russians, eating on these mambas, the tropical mambas. And, everything was kosher, but we were there for a long time. Well over 90 minutes, right? And so just sitting there and not saying anything. Mitch wasn't saying anything, and I wasn't saying anything. It's not a time to talk, right? But, just chilling. And then we started to hear engines, revving, the sound of vehicles. And they were coming towards us, but from the opposite side of the tracks that we were on. And so then Mitch got words. What's that? Bodie, did you hear that? And of course I fucking hear that, bro. Yeah, I hear that. What is it? And I'm I'm not sure, I don't know any more than you do, man. And so we're sitting there, and Mitch, right? This is when I knew that he either embellished all of that shit or he just was a liar, right? He looked at me right as these engines, they were getting closer, so we're getting close, and it's just he and me, he and I, and we're just there, and something is coming up to us, and he turned and he looked at me and he said, I don't know what to do. This guy that's said all this shit, man. So, so here's the thing, we got Rich, dope boy Rich, who has literally gone into the trenches and killed with his own hands Russians, man. We got, and if you look at Rich, and if you listen to Rich, you would never, the quietest is the livest, okay? And then we got people like Mitch, who come in there saying that they did this and that, and Rambo 7. I don't know what to do. After pulling out with his buddy, listen people, okay? If you want to go and you want to fight, then be ready to fight. Because if you go over there and you're a coward or some little bitch made hoe mother, you know what I mean? You're gonna get people killed. It's, if you don't know what you're doing, stay at home, man. Or if you, here's my situation. I was only there for Ashley. Everyone knew I was there for Ashley. I was gonna go do a hunger strike, but then the war started. President Zelensky called for volunteers, and so I said, you know what? Because people, they had enough. They're like, oh, it's so easy for you to do all this stuff for Ashley, right? When you're over here, over there, and you're in safety and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll go to war because I can both not kill two birds with one stone, right? I'm not in safety, and I'm fighting literally for other people's freedom so that people will help me fight for Ashley Westhuizen, which is why I continue to encourage you, dear viewer, to subscribe to this channel, because all of this was done and is being done for another human being who is really lovely and worthy of such devotion and sacrifice. And that's what humans are supposed to do, man. This is what humanity is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be all of this poster facade, Netflix, artificial ingredients, fat, slovenly, disgusting people with their noses inside of their phones and their laptops all the time, man. You know, life's not like that, okay? I was out there in Ukraine for a lovely woman who is in Thai prison right now. That's why I was there, okay? And so I'm out there with this guy, Mitch. I don't know what to do. If you don't know what to do, stay at home, son. Why are you here? So anyway, he didn't know what to do, so then I took over, okay? I said, Mitch, you stay here. I'm going to go on the other side. That way we can have two lines of fire onto this footpath, okay? If someone comes out, I'll fire first, and then we start bounding back to the railroad, and then we'll move back to where the squad was holding position at, okay? And he's like, what about if the vehicles come? I'm like, if the vehicles actually come and their headlights, like they see, you know, they're coming at us, don't move. Stay hidden. If I fire, then unleash with everything you have, including the frag grenades. Because as you can see in the picture, we each had 2 frag grenades apiece going out this night, right? I had my Makarov pistol, 2 frags, and then everything else. My RPG-7 and the AK-74 and my bayonet, which I wore like, well, you can see it. You can see in the picture. You know what I mean? So like, I was ready for that shit. But that's what I told him. That's what I told him. And then I moved, and I got in this position, and that's what we did, okay? And we heard the vehicles. They got really close, but they never came over the tracks, and they stopped where they were at, and then we heard them driving away. And so it made sense to me. I was like, they probably, in my head, right? Because again, like, I'm just telling you what happened. I wasn't at Iwo Jima. I wasn't at D-Day. There are people that have way more badass, visceral war stories than I do. I'm just telling you the story of what it was, okay? I had a very different life than most people, and so perhaps this is why I felt or acted or believed or behaved the way that I did when I was out in these situations. But I was, when out there, just very calm and collected, just like I, you know, am sitting somewhere at a park or a cafe. You just think normally, you know. I never had that problem like Mitch or, you know, or Kenny when the artillery, we have to get out of here, where it's just panic mode, you know. You think, you calculate, because otherwise you're just going to die or you're going to get other people killed. And so I was just sitting there thinking, oh, well, those vehicles were probably coming back to get our guys because we've been here for God knows how long. They're all just been sitting there. They probably came, picked them back up, and took them back to base. That was my thought process. And so then we continued to sit there for a long time more. And as we were sitting there, okay, this really ominous, very thick fog started to emanate up from the ground, okay? Because again, there wasn't as cold, very bright moon out, and so this fog started to come up and the visibility went down to probably 10 meters or less. And we were there 2:30 in the morning. And remember, first light is at about 3:30, 3:45 a.m. when I heard noises. I heard JT's voice. And then I waited just to make sure. I walked out. I waited until I was sure, and then I put my weapon to my side and I walked out with my hands raised slowly, you know, like slowly. And as I did, like George immediately, like he came like rifle up, and thank God he didn't pull the trigger, because then I probably wouldn't be here making this video right now. But he didn't shoot. He saw it was me, lowered his weapon, and then very quickly Mitch and I, we fell back into our original positions because we were moving back the way that we had come. And so what would happen is, now we were moving back the way we had come, I just said, to clear actually the mines that had been marked on the way there. So Nibs and JT had already succeeded in going to the very end of where we needed to go to secure the route for the armored vehicle with the cannon to come safely without getting blown up. They had marked all of those mines and they had cleared them. And in total, I'll go ahead and tell you, there were 23 anti-tank mines cleared by our squad, those guys, okay, during this part of the operation. 23. And so what would happen is, I already told you on the way he would mark them with the talcum powder. Then when we would come back, he and Nibs would go up near to where the mine was. And when I say near, I mean like sort of off the burn. Okay, so you have to imagine the trail, and then there's like a little de-elevation that leads into a burn. And so they would lay there, sort of prone, looking over top, if they could, if they were able, and they had a grappling hook. They would throw the grappling hook so that one or two prongs would hook on to underneath where the mine, because the mines were just laying on the dirt, and they would gently tug it and move it out of its position a few inches, and they would count to 10. And while they were doing this, everyone else that had been holding security, we would all have to get down, lay down flat with our Kevlars facing towards the blast, which obviously we weren't super near to, but this is anti-tank mines. They're very large in the blast radius as far as the shrapnel and everything. And so we laid down flat, prone, facing in that direction with our Kevlar facing that way. So hopefully if there was a mine and it blew up, we wouldn't get killed, theoretically. And so they would do that. They would count to 10, because a smart person, which the Russians, or a non-lazy person, I'm not saying the Russians weren't smart, but they seemed, at least at that time in that area, not to be very well motivated or perhaps well trained. You would put a mine under, well, first of all, you would bury them. So that's the first thing. You would conceal them. These were just laid out, literally like you would lay out a book on a table. And then secondly, if you did do that, okay, if you laid them out so blatantly, then what would be smart at least to do is put like another pressure mine, like some sort of pressure explosive ordnance underneath of that, so that when someone did pick it up or move it, then they would get killed from the mine, the explosion underneath. And so that's why JT and Nibs would pull the mine a few inches out of the way and then count to 10 to make sure that it had not been booby-trapped. Once they counted to 10, nothing happened, then they would just get up, one of them, walk over, pick up the anti-tank mine, and literally with their bare hands carry it far off enough of the trail that the BMT, whatever, would not have any risk of running over it during the morning's assault. And so that's what we did. We finished clearing that, and by this time, that whole gram, I took like a horse pill, a whole gram of paracetamol on my largely empty stomach that I had been filling with candy, right, for the previous hours. My stomach was starting to hurt, like really bad. It was like really uncomfortable. And if your stomach aches, man, that's a really hard injury to fake through, to just go through, right? I mean, if your stomach is really hurting, it's like debilitating the whole way through. Plus I got all those packs on and load, and I have to keep getting up and laying down in the prone position, because of the mines. I was like, oh my God, I was just not feeling it. And by this time, I'd been up at least 24 hours, like a whole day. I'd been up, not slept. And so I was just like not really feeling it at the time, but it is what it is. And so we continued making it back until we finished clearing the mines, 23 in all. And then we went back to the clearing where the rest of the squad had been left earlier, but they had all been taken back, as I thought, from the vehicles that Mitch and I heard come earlier, and they were back to base so that they could get some sleep, right? Because that made sense. That way they could be more rested for this assault. It was a big assault that we were going to be doing. The only people that were left were, of course, Sparta OPs. They were still on their OPs, Sparta. But the only people from our squad, the Wolverines that were left, were Gary and Zeb. Stephen Zeblowski, or Zeblowski, I think Zeblowski. And so they were the only ones that left. And so we got back and we saw them, and we were holding in position. And George, JT, Kenny, they got together. And Vitaly wasn't there. Just those three. They got together. And then they came and reported to the rest of us. JT did. And he said that they were going to call off the assault for this morning. Because, two reasons. Number one, don't think, oh my God, the assault's off, this guy isn't, no, shit still goes down. But it's just, the plan started to change, okay? And so they were like, we're not going to do the assault this morning because the fog, right? There's so much fog that the drone operators that fly above, they can't see, okay? And then even more importantly, in big importance, the mortar teams. The mortar teams can't walk in the mortar shells accurately, right? And these are big mortar shells, and if they're off by a little bit, then they can start hitting our guys. And so that was the reason that JT, and because it was later, it was already it was already getting to like first light. And when I mean first light, I mean the first gray of dawn, okay? The first grays of dawn were coming over the horizon. And so they decided to call it off. But it was decided also that an additional OP was going to be established, and that Gary and Zeb, they would man this new OP. So Kenny, George, Zeb, and Gary. Kenny and George would go with them to establish this new OP, which they would sit in to basically keep eyes on everything, to make sure that the Russians did not discover that we had been out there and moved like all of the mines, for instance, because obviously if that is discovered, then they would probably think that an attack was imminent. That would make sense, right? Why else are all the mines gone? And so we were going to establish a last OP to basically make sure, keep full eyes on that. And so Kenny came to me and he asked me, because of this new OP being established, for all of my food and water, so that Gary and Zeb, so that when they were going to carry it all with them and establish this OP, and they would have the resources to be able to stay there for the extra day. And so obviously I did that. I gave them all their stuff. And then it was also decided that while they were doing that, that JT, Dom, myself, and Mitch, that we would go back to base. We would go back to base, okay? And so so Kenny, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to stay with it. So then Kenny, George, it gets important, Stephen and Gary, they went their way back across the railroad tracks, back up the route we had cleared of mines to establish a last OP, okay? JT, Mitch, Dom, and myself, we then left the other way back to the hedgerow fields, and then we met Vitaly and Doc at the extraction point, which you'll see on the map. And so we started to climb inside, and my stomach was really hurting by this time. It was really, really uncomfortable. All I wanted to do was just sleep, was to lay down. It was really bad. And I even said to JT, once we got to the extraction point, you went around and checked on his guys like a good leader's supposed to. He was like, "How are you, Bodie?" I said, "Oh man, my stomach, it really hurts." And he asked, he's like, "Why? Like, are you nervous?" And I was like, "No," but I didn't feel like going into it. So I was just like, no, but anyway. And so we started to get into the vehicles to go back to base. I got into the driver's side vehicle with Vitaly as the driver. Dom and Mitch were in the car with me. JT was in the next vehicle back with Doc. And so we were in this vehicle and we were just about to go. And so I put my rifle between my legs, and I'm like, I just sat down and I leaned my head back against the window and I closed my eyes and I'm just ready to go to sleep, right? And then suddenly chatter starts on the radio. And it's in Ukrainian, of course, and so I don't know what the hell it is. But Vitaly, he's on this talking back and forth, and it's clear like something's not right. And I hear Dom behind me, and he's like, something's wrong with George. And I'm like, oh, like, so selfish, right? Because my stomach hurts. I'm just like, oh, are you serious? Like, what is going on, man? Like, why are we not going? And I look at Vitaly, I'm like, hey, man, like, what's up? Like, can we go? Like, And he's like, I have to help George. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, man. Like, what is going on? What can these people get it together? And so we start to drive, but we don't start to drive back to base. We start driving back down the rapeseed field, take the left, and then we drive into the cut where we had held the defensive perimeter, both vehicles, okay? And so we get into the cut, and it's decided that Vitaly and JT, they're going to take one of the vehicles forward, because, I don't know, some shit's going on. They're not, it's like 3:30 a.m., lights up, lights coming, 3:45, I don't know. I've been up for more than a day. My stomach hurts. I've been walking all night. I'm tired. I just want to sleep, you know what I mean? I'm just like, I'm not really cared. Like, obviously if they needed me, they would say something. So I'm just like, I literally just lay there and I went to sleep. And so, then I woke up because there was an explosion. Okay? So I woke up. So boom, there's an explosion, and I wake up. I come, and I wake up, and all of a sudden, Mitch is at the side of my door, and he looks at me, and he says, "Zeb's dead, and Gary's fucked." And immediately my stomach ache was gone. It was gone. Didn't think about my stomach again for the rest of the time. It was just over. And I grabbed my rifle, which had already had one in the chamber, because before we left the silo, as we were mounting up, we would always cock one. We kept it on safety, but we had one in the chamber. We were ready to go. And so, you know, I grabbed my rifle out of the floorboard. I hopped out, and Dom's gone. Okay, Dom's gone. It's just Mitch and Doc, the Ukrainian, this big Slavic guy, and he's unarmed. He's on the walk because he's a medic, and he's on the walkie-talkie, and he's like, "Dobre da Slava," and I'm like, I have no idea what he's saying, and you know, I'm asking, trying to figure out from Mitch, but Mitch is like, you know, like this, you know, panic attack Mitch. And so I tell Mitch, I say, go hold position at the rear of the opening. Again, you'll see all this on the map. Go hold position over there. I'm going to go up to the ridge line and see if I can see anything. And so he says, okay. And so he goes over there. Doc is still over there. I can't speak Ukrainian. Doc can't speak English. So, you know, I'm not really sure what's going on with him. I go up to the berm, right? There's a berm that leads up, and then there's the railroad track, and then, right? So there's the berm that leads up, and then the railroad track is down there, and then the other berm on the other side, right? So I'm like crouching sort of up this berm slowly with my rifle raised, because it's light enough now. It's like after 4, I'm not exactly sure of the time, but it's light. It's light enough, but it's still foggy. It's still foggy. And so I'm looking, I come out my rifle, and I'm looking, and I don't see anything, but I see this plume of black smoke, maybe 250 meters away, up the railroad tracks. I can see this, I can't see what it is, but I see this black smoke. And so then, suddenly, like, as I'm still there watching, Mitch, he appears behind me, this guy, and he's like, Mitch, Bodie, we gotta get out of here. And I like lose my stuff. I'm like, Mitch, get over there and hold position. You know, I just like lose it with this guy. I'm like, what are you doing? They could be coming from behind us. We have no idea. There's no one over there. Like, what are you doing, man? Just go back over in position. And so, you know, he's like, you know, frantic over there, and he's like not really complying. And so then I leave back the hill, and I go back to where he was, because now he's at Doc, and he starts pleading with Doc, trying to get Doc, like telling Doc, we have to go. So I go back over to the other side, and I look, I'm going out, because now it's light. Now I remember, because I remember when I looked out, it was like sunny. So it was like 6 in the morning by now, probably. I'm looking, okay? And I don't see anything. I can see the farmhouse far down that we had taken a route we had walked by one time, and so I didn't see anything. So then I go back over to Doc, and I start to hear rounds going off. Pop, 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 close by. And so I'm like, okay, man, like, I'm looking at Doc, and it's just Mitch and I. I have no idea what is going on, okay? I was asleep. Suddenly, I heard an explosion. Dom's gone. I see smoke. I'm hearing gunshots. I see the medic on the radio. He's freaking out. He's speaking in Ukrainian. Mitch is freaking out. He's not responding or doing anything helpful. And so now I'm going to Doc, and I'm like, yo, Doc, we need to go back to base and get reinforcement, like more men. I'm trying to do charades with this guy because he doesn't know what I'm saying. But I'm like, we need more men. Like, it's just, Mitch is not helpful. You're unarmed. It's just me, man. And like, if there's a bunch of Russians, I know their position is right over there. If they're coming for whatever reason, like, there's nothing we can do. I literally have an AK-74 and some grenades, man. That's it. Like, what do you want to do? We need to go back to base. We need to get our squad and our PKM and our other machine guns. We need to bring that shit back. You know, with the AT-4s and that, we need to come back with, you know, real quick. We could be back in 45 minutes probably, maybe an hour, something like that. And so anyway, Doc finally starts to agree with us and moves back over towards the van, right? This van, this brown, you'll see, this van. And he gets inside and turns it on, and Mitch is in the back seat, and he's like, oh, thank God, thank God. And I'm just, you know, sitting there like, yeah, let's go, man. Let's, like, hurry up. Like, let's go. What the fuck? And then Doc, for some reason, gets started, like, yelling is in the radio. I can hear the yelling. And then Doc turns the car back off, and he gets back out. And then Mitch is, like, losing his shit. And I'm like, Mitch, do you know how to drive back to base from here? He's like, no. And I'm like, well, fuck, I don't either, you know. So I'm like, but the railroads, like, if shit really hits the fan, we can just go on the railroad tracks and just go north. Because we know, as you'll see again in the picture, the railroad tracks lead directly to the silo. So we can literally, if the worst comes to worst, and again, this is what I'm saying, man, about thinking. You think. You never stop thinking, okay? This shit's going on. Yeah, it's chaotic, but you have to think, okay? What do you do? And so that's what I told him. Like, if shit really hits the fan, that's what we'll do. But he was like, what do we do right now? And I'm like, we gotta hold security on Doc. And so I'm going over to Doc, and Doc's still standing there. But then suddenly, Doc breaks, and he starts walking not towards the van, away from the van, towards the railroad tracks, the route that we had been clearing the night before. And so I start walking with him, and I'm yelling at Mitch. I'm like, Mitch, let's go. Like, come with me. We got to cover Doc. And Mitch is like, I can't. And I'm like, come on, Mitch. I'm like yelling at him. He's like, I'm sorry, Bodie. I can't. And I'm like, oh my fucking so, so then Doc just keeps going, and so Doc is getting further and further ahead of me. Mitch isn't moving, and so I follow Doc. I left this fucking coward behind, and I follow Doc. And I had my rifle range because there's the enemy hedgerow, and so I got my rifle up, and Doc is just like yelling into this fucking radio in the early morning. Okay, again, the fog is now lifted. Okay, you can see again. It is not super daylight, but it's daylight. It's basically bright daylight. Okay, it's the morning daylight, and so I'm like shh, like you don't have to yell, man. Shh, the Russians are right there, and so he's sort of quiet down. I'm keeping my rifle up. I'm literally the tree line the whole time as he's like moving behind me, following him up. Don't see anything. We make it to this curve on the trail because before we're out in the open, in an elevated position, silhouetted, okay? Terrible position to be in the daylight like that, okay? At nighttime, oh, not such a big deal. In daylight, oh my God, worst place to be. Finally, though, we come around the bend, and there's this bush there, this big bush that offers some concealment. And so as we got behind that bush and stood there for a moment, out to the right then, I saw on the railroad tracks that vehicle that Vitaly and JT had went in. It was on the railroad tracks, and it was on fire, and it was burning. So that's what was making the black plume of smoke. So we saw that, and I'm looking at the vehicle. I don't see anyone. I just see the vehicle burning on the tracks, okay? And then, I'm thinking, again, like the gunshots are probably from the rounds inside of the vehicle because there's no fire. I haven't heard any of the rounds. That's the thing. Like, there's no more bullets going. It was like for a few minutes, there was like these sporadic gunshots, and so then the rounds being cooked off inside of this vehicle because otherwise, like, why aren't the Russians? I'm sitting there wondering, like, what the hell, man? Like, there's been all this explosions, all this noise, all this chaos, all this smoke. It's in the early morning. Like, why are the Russians not here? But they weren't. And so we stood there. We didn't see anything. And I'm looking at Doc. I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, still have no idea what is going on. It's just pure chaos with me as, not a spectator or a witness or an observer, a participant, okay? And so I'm sitting there, like, trying to communicate through charades, just like with the guy back in Kiev when the dude was having a seizure, I'm trying to communicate, like, what is the problem? Like, what? Like, let's go. And so finally, Doc turns around, and we start going back the way we came towards the van. And we're going like a few hundred meters. And this is, again, you see the picture, okay, that I showed you. And we've been out all night. Like, it's not, and now I have my rifle raised the whole time. It's not easy, and I'm in good shape. I was in better shape, okay? It's really difficult. I was getting very fatigued. And then, as we come into sight of the van, for whatever reason, he turned around again. Doc turned around again. Just understand the chaos of war, right? You hear about the chaos of war? I can't think of anything more chaotic than this shite here, because I had no idea what was happening, and it just was like ridiculous. Back and forth. And so he started going back, man. And I'm just like, are you fucking serious right now? Like, I'm just dumbfounded. I'm just like, oh my God. And so anyway, I started to follow him again. Trying to keep my rifle raised, best I can, starting to droop a little bit because, again, my arms are burning. I'm hundreds and hundreds of meters. I'm just running, keeping security. And this time, we made it back to the burning bush. And this time, when we looked down the trail, we saw them. We saw like 6 guys, a group of guys. And in between them, it looked like a dark sheet or something, was another guy that was obviously being carried, okay? And so as soon as we saw them, we could see Vitaly, George, Kenny, Dom. We saw them. I think that's all that was there. It was just those 4 guys. And as soon as we saw them, then Doc, and Nibs, and Nibs was there. And so as soon as we saw them, then Doc and I immediately, we ran down to meet them, those hundreds of yards, or meters, same, basically. And so we ran down, and as soon as I got close enough, which we met them about almost abreast of the burning vehicle. So that's like, we went down, and by the time we got there, they were like where that burning vehicle was, next to the railroad tracks, and it was Gary. Gary was on this sheet, and he was white as a ghost. His legs were obviously mangled. Right here, there was a huge hole, just a huge hole, and he was just like in shock, mewing, yeah, just in terrible agony. And everyone was so exhausted, like Dom pouring sweat, everyone pouring sweat, because this was not a gurney. We had stretchers. I don't know why we didn't take them. This was just some sheet with no hand grips. This was like the hardest thing of my life that was about to transpire. The hardest, you know. So we had to. Gary was short and portly, and so we take our points on this. Our 7 guys now, however many. I'm not trying to keep a super accurate count, but I said the names of everyone who's there, and we start to move and carry Gary towards the van. And then as we get past, moving forward, someone looked back. I don't know who it was. And they were like, that's JT. And so then we stopped and we looked behind us. And miraculously, I don't know from where this guy came from, we see JT. He's like down there by this burning vehicle, walking in circles, bless his heart. Close enough where I'm sure he's being burned. Like within 3 meters of this burning vehicle, just walking in circles because he was blinded. You know, and deaf. His eardrums burnt. Like he was just fucked. JT was fucked. And so Vitaly, he told Nibs and Doc, go get JT. And so Nibs and Doc, they left us. They ran over to go and basically get JT. And the rest of us, Kenny, Dom, Vitaly, myself, and George, us 5, we were all that was left to carry George. And they had been already carrying him for a long time. Guys, okay, first of all, the only reason I was there was Ashley Oosthuizen, so please remember that. The only reason that I was there in this situation was Ashley Oosthuizen, to try and help her. So, number 1, subscribe. Number 2, this was the most difficult experience, because the thing was, we started to carry him, Gary, there was no hand grips. So you're just trying to deadlift with just imagine gripping a piece of fabric and then just trying to pull a corner of the fabric and deadlift all of that weight on your forearms, you know, however, a really large amount of weight while you already have all of your other weight on as you're trying to like evacuate this person who's dying, you know, who's clearly dying. And so, you know, we're moving, and at first we're able to go like 15-20 meters, and then we have to stop and rest. And then we're able to go like 15 to 10, and we have to stop and rest. And then, like, by the time, we're only going like 5 meters, and we have to stop and rest. And I tell Kenny, and George, I'm like, guys, we need to put someone on the tree line. Like, we need to just drag him, okay? Because we have no one on the tree line. We're all just sitting here. Everyone's yelling. Everyone's screaming. The Russians are right there, okay? They could come out and massacre us at any time, okay? We're just a machine gunner's wet dream. And Kenny's like, we can't drag him, mate. His legs are broken. And I'm like, well, they're not going to get any more broken if we drag him, Kenny. And then Kenny's like, we're not going to drag him. And I'm like, well, what the fuck then, man? We're just sitting. We can't even move. And we're going like 5 meters. So Kenny and I started to have this argument. And then we almost come to blows, you know, because he says some shit. And I'm like, fuck you, man. And then George is like, guys. And so I'm just like, geez, I'm so frustrated because how stupid and absurd all this shit is, man. It's like, look, get 4 people, drag his ass, okay? Yeah, his legs are shattered, but they're not going to get more shattered. You have 2 people that way that are having eyes on the tree line. That's what you do, okay? But no, you have these people that are making, again, emotional decisions, man. They're just out there thinking, they're just they're not thinking. They're not thinking, you know? And that's what made me so upset, you know? You're going to cost 9 people potentially their lives because of one person's broken legs. Just drag his ass, and then we can get out a lot faster and have security. But anyway, they didn't want to hear that shit, man. So it's like, fuck you guys. Sorry for all this language, but it was a very intense time. And so we continue to carry him, and we move around like musical chairs to different sides of him as he's, guys, please. And I'm not trying to make fun of Gary. Like, Gary was in tremendous agony, and we're taking a really long time because because of the way and manner that we're doing this. And so we're trying to move around to grab with different arms and shuffling all our shit around, making snail's progress, going so slow that Nibs and Doc managed to overtake us with JT, who has literally been cooked alive inside of this vehicle. I don't know how long the guy was inside of the burning vehicle for, man. Just extravagantly brutal. But they managed to overtake us, and we finally come into sight of the van. And by this time, Sparta team, I guess they had seen and heard all the explosions and gunshots. They had like evacuated back to the extract point where they had been told to go in case something like that had happened. And so as we came, we saw the van, and we saw the guys from Sparta team, including this really cool Polish guy, besides Dom, and Mitch. And as soon as I saw Mitch, I was like, I yelled, dude. I was like, Mitch, get your here and help your fucking boy. And, and so Mitch started to run up, and this other big Polish guy, this big, not quite as big as Dom, they came up, and then finally, with like 100 meters left, Vitaly and I were able to hold rear security as we got JT and Gary to the van. We loaded them on the van, and because I was the squad medic and Doc was the driver, then Dom, and Doc, we got in the van to go with Gary and JT to the evacuation point where there were going to be some ambulances waiting, and the rest of the squad was going to stay there, and they were going to have to wait for more vehicles to be able to come, because again, we had already lost the vehicle, and we lost all the equipment. We lost the thermal imaging. Thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment and gear was lost in that explosion, which we'll come to the next, because this is already 50 minutes and I still have more to go. So then, yeah, I get into this van and we start to drive, and that's when this video that you'll see comes on.
We're gonna be there soon. Free Ashley. Hold on. Looks like a compound fracture on both legs. I gotta cut up higher on the pants. See if there's any more bleeding. Free Ashley.
And as soon as the video was over, I proceed, and so, you can hear, like in the video, Gary and mewing, and see JT, and JT doesn't look nearly as bad as he actually was. And, I took out, the only reason I did this video is, again, because of Ashley, right? And so I had been so up, so amped, so angry, so full of rage and emotion, and then when I got into this van, and Gary was just laying there with his legs, you'll see them, the bones sticking out, just gore, blood everywhere, and I'm thinking of Ashley, and you hear in the video, I say free Ashley twice. Like I started to get like all these emotions going through me, man, all these emotions. You start to get emotional. But then as soon as I, finished and I put the clip away, or I put my phone away, because it was like 45, or however long that video is that you just saw, then I started to get to work, man. And so it was really difficult. I had these scissors that I was going to use to cut the pant legs off, because in the video you saw like he had these tourniquets on, but I needed to take the tourniquets off and cut up the pants to check to see if there was more bleeding. And these fucking shears, man, they didn't do anything, and I was so angry, and I threw them down, and I yanked my bayonet out, and I started to use that very like I was trying to, and again, like clothes in a dryer, because now I'm in the back of a van. If you've ever been in the back of a school bus when it goes over a speed bump moving fast, just imagine that constantly for like 25 minutes. That's what I was in, trying to do critical first aid to Gary as we're both getting just thrown around. And as I'm getting thrown around and I have this bayonet and I'm trying to cut off his pants, he's screaming, "Oh, you're cutting me, Bodie! Oh, my back, oh, like all this stuff. It's just, and JT is crying out in pain from his burns and everything. Now he's starting to puff up and blister, and I'm trying to help cut all Gary's pants, and I finally get the tourniquets and the pants off, and I reach behind his thigh, and just imagine reaching into a pack of like 2-week-old chicken that's been left out on the counter. And chicken that's been like cut up into slithers. So you just reach in, it's like that slimy pieces of meat, man. It was like this gaping hole in the back of Gary's thighs. He was just opened up. And so, you know, it's just gore. And so I started to pack his legs with all this gauze that I had, making a huge mess in the back of the van, wrapping these bandages around, trying to take his shoes off. Again, his bones are sticking out. I'm trying to wrap something around his bones. He's screaming in agony. We're moving around. When we hit big bumps, Doc's like, fuck, man, because of the big bumps. Dom, we're going to be there soon. We're going to be there soon. JT just sitting there wincing. And so, you know, I do the best I can. I'm able to get Gary pretty well, patched up as far as his wounds, packed with gauze and wrapped tightly. And he was so cold, and I gave him my water, my canteen, like just first aid. And suddenly we made it out. And as soon as we made it off-road onto where the actual road was that led to the silo, there was a waiting ambulance there, right there, which was really impressive. And so as soon as we got there, obviously we hopped out. They were right there. We helped get Gary over. I gave him a first aid blanket because he was cold. He was so white. He was shivering from shock or loss of blood, or maybe a combination of both. Again, JT was starting to swell up and look ghastly. Bless his heart, man. He was terrible. And so Dom and I and Doc, we got them into the ambulance, and then the ambulance took off. And then Doc had to go. Doc basically immediately left. You'll see this video.
Сейчас он туда уже едет.
Okay. Добре. Дякую. Free Ashley.
And so then Doc, right after that, talking to Doc, he hopped in the van and left to go back to get some more of the guys. And then Dom and I were waiting there by the side of the road for us two to get picked up by a truck that was coming from the silo. And while we were there, I was asking Dom, like, what happened? Like, where's Zeb? And that's when Dom told me that Zeb was dead. And I asked him, I was like, well, what happened? But Dom didn't know. Dom was just like, Zeb was dead. We couldn't carry both of them. And yeah, because Zeb was a big guy. Zeb was like JT's size. And Gary, was the hardest thing in my life for all 5 or 6 of us to carry Gary that half a kilometer, you know, that we did. And so to be able to carry Gary and Zeb, there's just no way. Even if we were dragging him, and so Zeb was left there. And Dom and I were there, and we sat there. I was covered in Gary's blood, and I collected my belongings, and we waited to get picked up and go back to the silo. And I'm going to stop it there because this video is already long enough. But we have to get Zeb back, Mitch, Hogan, those cowards, like all this stuff. You know, JT, who was our squad leader, now he's gone. Gary's gone. Zeb's dead. All this stuff, but it's already 55 minutes, and it's going to take a while to edit. So I'm going to stop this video. But all this stuff, people, is for love. To get a woman that doesn't deserve to be in prison and misery in hell out of there. And so, you know, I hope that all of these actions have warranted your clicking the subscribe button and maybe even encouraging other people to do the same, because once enough people do, then Ashley will get the media attention she deserves, and once that happens, then freedom will quickly follow. It's just a matter of numbers, and I hope that you will add yours. We'll continue this next week. God bless. Free Ashley. Much love.